Today we step into the world of science, creepy science. We're talking about some of the creepiest experiments, from history, and some of the creepiest abandoned labs.
Yeah, abandoned for good reason.
Yes, a lot of them.
Thank God that they're no longer operative today. James, take it away.
I will. And we're starting off with an abandoned biology lab. TikToker Brian Sansevero posts videos exploring abandoned places or just making memes about them. But his abandoned biology lab has to be one of the creepiest on his channel. This lab in New Hampshire is full of equipment and specimens that have been left behind. I mean, you have the typical stuff you'd find in old abandoned labs, L-minor flasks and other tools and stuff, but there was also a wide variety of animals in jars. Frogs, snakes, turtles, pigs. The creepiest had to be the human brain though, which Brian didn't show on video but listed as something he saw while filming in the video description. Definitely some spooky stuff. Who here would be taking some of that stuff home with you though? Gotta say, I'd be tempted. I'd take a human brain with me, just leave it right on the coffee table. It's a conversation starter.
Next up on our list today, we have the abandoned Anderlecht Veterinary Labs located in Anderlecht, Brussels. The laboratory was constructed in the early 20th century and it was one of 19 buildings located on the grounds of the veterinary school. In 1991, the building was abandoned when the school relocated to another district. What was left behind was gross and unethical and gross. It appears that what had been going on behind the closed doors of the Institute was much more so macabre experimentation than classical scientific exploration. How, you might ask, did myself and historians come to that conclusion? Well, you see, after the building was abandoned, it was, as many abandoned places are, explored, and those who entered the laboratory were met with dilapidated hallways, beakers, bottles, and needles filled with questionable fluids, rusty old medical equipment, and animal heads and brains jammed into jars with formaldehyde, as well as new, never-before-seen animals created by sewing together the various parts of cats, dogs, rats, birds, and pigs to create something that spits in the face of natural order. Would I recommend going here? No. Do I assume that at least a handful of you have gone or will go anyways? Yeah, I do.
Next up, we have the Jupiter factory, sitting on the outskirts of Pripyat. It was abandoned in 2002. But before the Chernobyl disaster in 1986, there was allegedly some fishy stuff going on in this place. Officially, the factory was used to produce radio and audio equipment, but supposedly this was just a facade. The factory was apparently a secret military research and production facility involved in nuclear weapons. It opened in 1980 and employed about 3,500 people. On top of the secret military tests and equipment being produced here, there was also said to have been a robotics department. As for what these robotics were, who knows? After the Chernobyl disaster, the facility became a radiological lab used for testing decontamination techniques. So whatever top secret stuff was used there is gone now. There's not a whole lot left in the place. Most of it has been gutted. There are, some old posters on the walls and some equipment scattered about, but it's mostly just a rusty old building with moss covering the floor.
Okay, next up, Vozrozhdeniya Islands Labs, because I love torturing myself with things I can't pronounce. Grammar police, drop me the phonetics in the comments. I know you were gonna do it anyways. Back to the important stuff. During the 1920s, the Soviet Union officials were looking for a place, isolated and surrounded by desert, where they could perform some pretty dangerous biological weapons tests. They genetically modified the plague, anthrax, smallpox, brucellosis, tularemia, botulinum, and Venezuela equine encephalitis. Again, correct me in the comments. Anyways, they modified these pathogens so that they would all be resistant to medical treatment. This practice, of course, completely violated the 1972 treaty between Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, which strictly banned the use of biological weapons in any capacity. But it gets worse, because not only did they create these weapons, they tested them too, on as many as 300 monkeys who during the 18 years of the lab's operation were exposed to the viruses killed within weeks by the viruses, and then autopsied so that Russian scientists could see the extent of the virus's damage on their bodies. Eventually, the waters surrounding the island dried up, and it became part of the surrounding desert. While the majority of pathogens would have been destroyed by now due to high temperatures, time, and harsh conditions, it is highly likely that the medical treatment-resisted anthrax has survived to this day, because that's just what it does, and it's likely buried beneath the sands surrounding the abandoned laboratory. Don't go there. Please.
A TikToker named Letchworth Exploratory filmed this abandoned animal testing facility in Minnesota. The place looks like a complete horror show. Not only does it have the unsettling atmosphere of a rundown old abandoned place, but the fact that it was an animal testing facility just makes it extra icky. And the place was huge, 10 floors with different testing facilities on each. Some of the creepiest things they came across were the cages where they kept the animals, still mostly intact. Of course, they found the morgue with the autopsy exam tables still sitting there. There were also tons of research and test samples left behind, including a test sample with a label reading radioactive on it. Probably something that should have been disposed of properly rather than being left behind in a place where people are capable of sneaking into.
Next up, we've got Unit 731, a laboratory located in a Japanese-occupied bunker built in China in 1941. A laboratory where up to 12,000 men, women, and young people were killed in some of the most barbaric ways you can think of. You see, autopsies were common practice in Unit 713, but the thing is, things were done a bit differently by the Japanese surgeons performing them at the time. For starters, the patients which the autopsies were being performed on were alive. And they weren't given anesthesia either, and they were exposed to deadly biological and chemical weapons during the process as well. It was really messed up. But wait, there's more. The lab bred plague-infected fleas and then airdropped them on various cities throughout China. While the bunker was originally thought to be lost, recently archaeologists discovered an underground structure near the Chinese city of Anda that they believe to be the infamous Unit 731. The structure is a complex maze of tunnels and rooms, with some rooms showing evidence of having once been laboratories, holding cells, dissection rooms, and viewing rooms. Not a great look.
The next place was about as despicable as it gets. Fernald State School in Massachusetts, which has sat abandoned since 2014. This place was built in 1848 as a mental institution, but it's gone down in history as one of the worst facilities of its kind because of the illegal radiation testing. Yeah, that'll do it. So this testing was done, of course, on patients, many of whom were underage, and these unethical experiments in radiation were sponsored by institutions like MIT and the Quaker Oats Company. It involved feeding the young patients radioactive materials in their breakfast cereals to study the effects the radiation would have on the human body. They were told they were a part of a science club and promised extra treats and outings in order to bribe them to participate. And was there consent from the parents? Well, apparently some of them did consent, which I find more disturbing than if it all been done in secret. What the hell kind of parent would consent to experiments like this? Incredibly sad and disturbing.
Next up, we have an abandoned lab discovered in China by a Chinese civilian. The discovery was made on February 22nd of 2020, and well, it's pretty disturbing. While exploring abandoned buildings in China, a man came across what he thought was just another fun place for urban exploration. But he was wrong, because the videos he shared online do not look fun at all. He is seen entering the building to discover that it is in fact an abandoned laboratory. The whole thing is in complete disrepair, and according to him, it smells overwhelmingly of death. The explorer decides to follow the smell down into a basement, where he discovers a concrete pool filled with dark water and a pile of human remains in various states of decomposition. Reasonably so, he runs out of and far away from the building. But 10 months later, for some reason, he returns. The bodies are still there and appear to have gone into further states of decomposition. Not only that, but there are even more bodies in the pool now, and a small bag of bones is found inside of the basement as well. Because of all of this, people online began speculating that the abandoned building was linked to the Chinese organ black market, and that the government must be in some way involved with the scandal. After that, the man's channel was removed from the Chinese versions of YouTube and TikTok, only to come back 3 days later with all of the videos of the discovery having been wiped completely from the site, and he never brought it up again. Didn't even mention it, and he was pretty creeped out, so it seems like a cover-up to me. What do you think? Let me know.
Letchworth Village was an institution in New York for people with developmental disabilities. It was basically a small village, originally being built with the intent for patients to lead independent lives. But the utopian idea of the place didn't really pan out. Letchworth Village has a dark past, a lot of it to do with the unethical clinical trials and experiments that would go on in the lab. In the 50s, the facility was used for testing an early version of the polio vaccine, but it was tested on mental patients without their consent. They weren't able to understand or agree to the experiments, and reports from the time described poorly maintained conditions. And as the years passed, the mistreatment and neglect at Letchworth Village became more well known, and the institution became a symbol of the horrors of outdated mental health care practices. By the time it closed in 1996, many of the buildings had fallen into ruin.
And finally, we have an abandoned laboratory located in Midland, Michigan, that most certainly did not meet the standards of any kind of public health and safety act out there. Why? Well, because it was unlicensed, unregulated, and it was being run out of an apartment complex that housed multiple other tenants who were completely unaware of what had been happening either just below, just above, or just beside them. On November 19th of 2015, it was discovered during a routine fire inspection that a previous resident of the complex had been using one of the now abandoned units as a lab, and he had stocked that lab with various hazardous chemicals, some of which were either explosive or toxic. Officials also found organic compounds in the unit, but did not specify which. Luckily, the presence of the makeshift laboratory was discovered before anyone got hurt. Tenants were evacuated as all potential hazards were removed from the unit, which hopefully now sits empty and has not since been rented out to a nice local family. Just saying.
Well, welcome back, Hannah.
Yes, any home labs at your house, James?
Yes, I'm actually a clone of James. My name is Samaj, which is James spelled backwards.
Oh.
That's why I'm bald. I wasn't born with hair.
I see.
It's like the Matrix. You just come out like all like hairless and goo, you know?
Yeah, it's a fun visualization. Think about it. Think really hard. My name is Hannah, which is Hannah spelled backwards. I've been one of your hosts.
And I've been your other host, Samaj. We'll see you in the next video.
That we will.